Today on 1% Better.
Let's remember that our job as parents is to put ourselves out of a job. And that means raising a kid who can fend without us, not when they're 8, but, 18 maybe, or certainly 28.
Welcome to 1% Better. I'm your host, Joe Ferraro. Thank you so much for joining. Today's conversation is with Julie Lythcott-Haims, author of the book, How to Raise an Adult. But just as important is the subtitle, Break Free of the Overparenting Trap and Prepare Your Kid for Success. I went ahead and piloted a soundbite from this interview with two good friends. And while they were listening to it, they got uncomfortable. It's one of those things where if you know Julie, if you get to know her work, you see the tone is with good intentions, but that doesn't mean when you hear what she has to say that it's for you or that you think it's for you. So many people will hear today's advice and think, that's great parenting advice. I love it. Oh, I could never do that with my kid. And if I do anything with our conversations on this podcast, what I hope to do is start conversations, not end them. Hear this, listen to it, share it with someone you trust, and see where they stand on it. See what Julie missed. See what you agree with. As always, you can find me on Twitter interacting at Ferraro on Air. And go ahead and send Julie a note at @DeanJulie. She's been very generous with her time and her insights. Her book is a must-read, and she just simply gives us a lot to think about. You know a parent, you are a parent, you know a teacher who would benefit from this conversation. Please reach out. Let me know how it's affecting you, what you've done with it, what you agree with, and how to keep the conversation going. And with that, my conversation with Julie Lythcott-Haims. Julie, thank you so much for joining us.
Joe, thanks for having me.
I've seen your speaking schedule, so this is no small task. Thank you.
You know what? It's the depths of summer right now, and I'm delighted that I have a lot more time at home. I'm not on the road right now, and just really excited to get a chance to chat with you today.
It means a lot, and I wonder if we could open, actually, with a real slice of humanity, with you taking your child to college. This is something that, at that time of year, parents are sending them, parents are releasing them, parents are joining them. What was that experience like from you in two ways? One, just as a human being, which I know you're extremely interested in, but then as an author and a speaker on this subject.
Well, it was my worlds colliding, and I decided to honor the human being that I am and not try to be the author or the expert. That is to say, I think I loved myself through a process that was emotionally bewildering and excruciating at times. Took my eldest, Sawyer, an 18-year-old boy, up to Reed College in Portland, which is a small liberal arts college full of really deep thinkers. And my kid's the kind of kid that carries a book with him everywhere he goes. And Reed College is the kind of place for kids like that. And both he and my husband and I, had a sense that this was going to be a good fit for him. Nevertheless, though, we adore this kid, as any set of parents do. And in the days leading up to his departure, I became increasingly emotional, and in ways that surprised me. I'm I'm an emotional person, but I'm also, kind of type A and have my stuff together as often as possible. So I was sort of a bit bewildered by the ways in which the emotion would hit me. I'd start seeing small animals dead in the road and immediately think, oh my God, my offspring won't survive when they leave my home. These kind of omen-like images were filling the summer. And, I tried to push my fears to the side and really, not let them get the best of me. I think the most emotional moment was when we left home. My daughter, who's 16, stayed behind, and she and her brother are very close. And watching my children hug each other in the driveway and bawl just broke my heart. And that was a hard one. And then we had a 10-hour drive up from Silicon Valley to Portland, and we decided to just invest in our emotions by my son first put on an Eagles soundtrack. So we listened to Hotel California and Take It Easy and Peaceful Easy Feeling. And then, I said to him, hey, would you mind if we put on some more, emotional stuff? And he's like, not at all. So we started listening to Dan Fogelberg and Luther Vandross and, just songs that are about, children and parents. And we just, all three of us, my husband, son, and I, just wept in the car. And I think that was a way for us to just acknowledge, like, this is a really emotional undertaking. And instead of pretending it's not, why don't we just, loosen the spigot and let it flow? And I think, being in tears in the middle of nowhere, California, on the way to Oregon, turned out to be a real kind of catharsis for us. So by the time we got up to Oregon, we had done a lot of crying, which didn't mean there wasn't more to do. There was, when we finally, were ready to move on, and the college was telling us to move on. But I guess attending to the emotions along the way, rather than pretending that this is not an emotional event, turned out to work really well for us.
What a beautiful story. Generous to share that. And when I hear it, I hear a couple of things that I'd love to ask you about. And you leaned into the emotions. You actually, it seems to me that you sought out putting on emotional music. So it wasn't something you were trying to run from. Is that a typical strategy that you use in your family?
I think we try to be, we celebrate the human experience, and emotion and sadness and fear and worry and anxiety are just as much a part of life as joy and exhilaration and happiness and so on. So yeah, I think we, my husband is a very emotive person. It's one of the things I love about him. He's not kind of the stoic male type. And so he's made it possible for our kids to open up to him, and they do to me as well. So yeah, I think, I think that's a place where we're comfortable, and I think, it serves us well. And then we can say, okay, wow, we're sad. Yeah. Okay. And then we can wipe our tears and smile, and somebody makes a joke, and, and we move on.
Yeah, that's great. See, that's important to me as I go through my work. The show is entitled 1% Better, and I find myself constantly in that tug of war between the head and the heart. And in your book, How to Raise an Adult, there's definitely heart. In fact, you start a lot of chapters with song lyrics, and it's very clear that you love music. But I do wonder, do you think Sawyer is on campus at Reed hearing refrains from his mom in the background? Does he have mantras?
What a lovely question. Sawyer, like any kid these days, carries music in his pocket, on his phone with his earbuds. This is a kid who likes to go for walks in the rain and listen to music. One of the reasons he wanted to go to college in the Pacific Northwest was for the rain. So this is a kid who invites music and lyrics into his life to help him process stuff, which I've always loved. I sing. I've sung to Sawyer since he was little, and even have just, in a very informal sense, recorded a few songs myself. And he has some of my stuff, in his playlist. I know he's got a couple songs of mine that are favorites of his. And so, I don't know, obviously, what Sawyer's doing and what's in the background of his life right now at Reed, but I know that music and lyrics matter to him. So I'm guessing that as these first few days unfold, and as he's going through the bewildering process of learning where things are and making a few new friends and, figuring out how to construct his day, I have a hunch that music is a constant companion.
I love it. And I think what you've done, even accidentally perhaps, is contrast some of the emotions that readers, teachers, and parents who are listening are feeling. You opened the book, the very first sentence in your introduction, saying, "This is a book about parents who are over-involved in the lives of their kids." A beautiful, straightforward sentence, but everyone who's read that and everyone who's listening understands that there's incredible amounts of subtext there. So with all the support, with all the guidance that you just beautifully illustrated for us, it's no accident that throughout the book you say you struggle sometimes with being over-involved. How do we approach that as parents? I mean, the focus of our conversation today is better parenting, but yet you're very careful in the book to say you don't have it all figured out. What ways can you point us to kind of manage that ever present tug of war?
Well, Joe, when I first was concerned with overparenting, it was, a decade ago, more than a decade ago. I was a dean at Stanford. I was watching young people come to our campus with parents who wouldn't let go. And I was frustrated on the students' behalf, annoyed, just thought, hey, folks, what's the deal here? What's wrong with you? And then I came to the very humbling discovery with my kids who were then much younger. They were maybe, 6 and 8 or 8 and 10. I leaned over one night at dinner and began cutting Sawyer's meat when he was 10. And that was my aha moment. That's what made me say, okay, wait a minute. A parent cannot let go, quote unquote, of an 18-year-old college student if they've been doing too much for them up until the day before they took the kid to college. And my cutting Sawyer's meat at 10 years of age was, really emblematic of the larger problem. I needed to be sure my kid could hold a knife and fork and cut meat and heck, he had to do a whole lot of other things. And I realized in that moment that we parents are over helping with the best of intentions, right? I want to make sure my kid can eat. I'm cutting his meat. I can do it for him. It's helpful. It's loving. And I began to appreciate that, while it seems loving to do everything for them constantly, it's actually most loving if we teach them to do for themselves, simply because we won't be here forever. And we don't want our grown child to be bewildered when we finally, as their parents, really lack the capacity or wherewithal to do for them any longer because of our own fragility and frailty in our old age. So, I struggle constantly with being overwhelmed. So I moved from being this judgmental dean to being a really compassionate dean. I was always compassionate with my students, but now able to be compassionate with their parents and really began to appreciate the complexity. And I tell you what, when I began writing the book, I didn't realize quite how much of a helicopter parent I was. I became so much more aware of my own tendencies as I began touring the book and talking about examples with audiences. And I was doing a lot of overparenting at Reed College a few days ago. We think you need more bookshelves, don't you think? Yes. So off we went. But the overparenting that made me chuckle was, while my husband assembled the bookshelf from IKEA, which, let's face it, he loves to do. He's a guy. I arranged every book on that shelf. I thought, my son has brought a bunch of books with him from home, and I want them to be organized. I want them to be in alphabetical order. What I was doing was pouring a last dollop of love into my kid's life. It was like, this is the last thing I'm going to get to do for my kid for months. I'm going to do this well. And when I say overparenting, people may balk at this example I'm using, but what I mean is, my kid could have put the books on the shelf. My kid probably would have benefited from setting up his room, from having more of a hand in it. He sort of watched us do it instead of, doing more of it for himself. And, I think that's the rub. We want to know that when we're gone, and I don't mean dead, but I mean we've left them behind at college, that, they can kind of go through the motions and tasks of life. And we have confidence that they can if we haven't been holding their hand or handling every little thing right up until that final moment.
Yeah, so much to unpack there. I'll start with saying that let's underline the fact that you were dean of freshmen at Stanford, one of the finest institutions in the world. You and I have spent a lot of our professional lives in education, and I find, and I don't know if you found the same, people end up saying quite frequently, oh, here at this school, at school X or school Y, we just don't give the kids enough freedom. We're just too hovering. We're too helicoptery. And here you are telling it's happening at Stanford. And to me, unless I'm wrong, if it's happening at Stanford, it's happening everywhere.
Well, I wonder if that's true, Joe. I think a place like Stanford might be a hotbed of overparenting simply because the standards that Stanford has evolved to require, and places like it, over the years, I think necessitate parental overinvolvement. If your aim is to get your kid to a school that requires a childhood that was perfect, by which I mean flawless, by which I mean, the highest grades and scores and all of the accolades and awards and activities and sports and leadership and community service. I mean, it's exhausting to even articulate it. as a sentence, imagine how exhausting it is for a child to live it. I think when childhood has been about all of that accumulation of impressive stuff, it comes with a lot of parental over-involvement, because for most kids, it's impossible to achieve all that without a parent or two laying the path, smoothing the path, weeding the path, So in some ways, I think you're not correct in that if it's happening at Stanford, it's happening everywhere. I think Stanford's in that set of schools that, has asked, such a degree of excellence and perfection of young people that parental over-involvement is par for the course.
That makes sense. I'll accept that clarification for sure. Then the follow-up question then is, I can tell in your spirit you're not someone who uses the word blame too willy-nilly, but we got to talk about cause. Why? Let's just leave it at that. Why is this happening?
Well, I'll tell you what. When we began noticing parents over-involved in the lives of their college students at Stanford in the late 90s, parents who we'd giggle at and about, after they left, who just didn't seem to realize that their job was to, maybe escort their kid to campus, maybe set up a few bookshelves, pay the bills, but leave. These were parents who wanted, in the late 90s, who wanted to talk to a professor about a concern they had about a class, or wanted to sit in an information session about study abroad, when you'd expect the student to be able to do those things, or they wanted to register their child for class, but you'd expect the student. Anyway, because we noticed it in the late 90s, I, in writing my book, dialed back to, what was childhood like for those college students coming to college, say 98, 99? What was their childhood like? And what I discovered were 5 factors at work that changed childhood in the mid-80s. The play date was born. The self-esteem movement was born. Ribbons and trophies just for showing up to play soccer, not for being any good at it. The stranger danger concept was born with a, highly watched movie about the abduction and murder of a young child. We became safer in cars and bicycles with car seats and seat belts and bike helmets. And then finally, a book was published called A Nation at Risk, saying American teenagers needed more testing and more teaching to the test in order to compete with their peers around the globe. So from play to playgrounds to after-school activities to malls and sidewalks and homework, childhood was in the early to mid-'80s starting to become highly attended by parents. I guess what I'm saying is the first kids, quote unquote, to come to college with parents who couldn't let go were the first kids to have ever had what we now call a play date, a childhood highly managed by parents. Now, a few set of parents began, attending childhood in this way, but it became the way people parented. Why? Because every one of these behaviors comes with a short-term win. If we're there at the playground to prevent our kid from falling off the climbing wall or skinning their knee, they go unbruised. If we're there to watch over a play date and make sure everybody's always taking turns and always getting along, and we intervene rather than letting kids work it out, their ego, their feelings go unbruised or unharmed. When we are there to manage their academics, keeping track of their deadlines and did they turn in their homework and what grade did they get on this quiz, we are likely helping them achieve sooner and faster. But the long-term cost to all of these short-term wins is that the kid emerges from this childhood not having done enough of the stuff of life for themselves. And this sort of long-term cost really hits a kid in the mental health arena. They're more likely to be anxious. They're more likely to be depressed. And these things emerge because the kid hasn't formed a healthy self. They've been little performance animals. They've been managed through their childhood instead of actually kind of living a normal, healthy childhood. So the short-term wins are why we do it. And I think we're only beginning to see the long-term costs, which thankfully I think are waking parents up to the fact that, wait a minute, what I really want is for my kid to emerge healthy and whole out into their adult years, and their mental health and wellness isn't something I can trade or exchange for, a 4.0 GPA or admission to the right college.
The seduction of the short-term win. Yeah, no doubt about it. How much of those fears that you just outlined are legitimate and need to be taken very seriously?
Well, stranger danger is a great example. The abduction and murder of Adam Walsh in 1981 from a mall, I believe it was, in Florida, spawned the made-for-TV movie Adam, which was produced by his father, John Walsh, who went on to lobby Congress for the Center for Missing and Exploited Children to be created, and he created America's Most Wanted, the TV show. We took one horrific incident, and it really kind of pivoted the way America thought of childhood and children. The FBI would tell us that the rates of these horrific incidents happening are no higher today than they were when you and I were young. I don't know how old you are, but we are no less safe today. In fact, we are safer. There's less violent crime toward all humans in America, regardless of age, than was the case in the 70s and 80s. But because of our 24/7, 365 smartphone, social media, news culture, we hear about a terrible thing happening instantly wherever around the globe it may be happening. So our fear is terribly, terribly heightened. The statistics on the likelihood of it happening do not support our degree of fear. In fact, our children are more likely to be harmed by a family member in the most horrific ways one imagines could come at the hands of a stranger. That's more likely to happen with a family member, far more likely than at the hands of a stranger. But we don't construct our family life accordingly. They're more likely to die, in a car, as a passenger in a car, than at the hands of a stranger. They're more likely to be harmed by playing football. So we take plenty of risks, with our kids by putting them in cars and letting them play combat sports. And so I think that's an example of how, there's legitimate fear, and there's how do we manage our fear so that our kids don't live a sheltered, bubble-wrapped life that really prepares them to be little more than veal out there in the world when they do leave our homes. We're not, we have this admonishment, don't talk to strangers, and that's born of our stranger danger fear. That's not a skill. Don't talk to strangers is no life skill, because when they leave our homes, their life, to go to college or the workplace, their lives are full of strangers.
Yeah.
The skill is, how do you discern the one creepy stranger from the vast, vast majority of humans who are good? That's what we need to be teaching them.
Yeah, how to talk to strangers properly, how to discern. I'm 39, by the way, and I didn't see Adam, but I am still scarred by a Different Strokes episode where Sam was kidnapped, and it was terrifying. So on somewhat of a darkly comic note, I understand where parents are coming from.
Sure.
And if you couple that with the seduction, as I said, of the short-term win, you put it beautifully, there's got to be one more piece to it at least. But one of the ones that jumps out at me is, just for lack of a better term, the keeping up with the Joneses. The idea that, well, I don't want to do this for Zachary, but if I don't, Jennifer's mom will do the same, and I fall behind. Have you seen that?
Absolutely. When I'm still getting to go around the country and talk to parents about how to raise an adult. I'm fortunate that there's interest in the book still 2 years out of publication. And the joke that I make in every community is that we're all doing our kids' homework, and they will titter nervously as I say this, and they start to laugh. And I say, raise your hand if you know someone who's doing their kids' homework, and everyone's happy to raise their hand about someone else or to try to be one step removed from it. But then I say, look, you can't not do your kids' homework, because if you just let them turn in their essay or their math as it is, your kid will be competing with every other kid's parent. And everyone in the room bursts into laughter. They all know it's true. And so, that keeping up with the Joneses thing is happening at the level of K through 12 academics, which is why all of a sudden the science projects seem to require a PhD in biology or chemistry or physics. It's because the parent with that PhD or that, who's an industry expert, is doing the science project for the grader or the seventh grader. And it's all, in theory loving. But you know what it tells that kid? When the dad or the mom does the project, it tells the kid, hey, kid, you're incompetent. I have to do your homework for you. And boy, does that mess with a young person's sense of self.
Yeah, not to mention years later, I still remember a parent doing a science fair project for one of my classmates. I had worked all night, and they came in with this elaborate moon rock expose. Nerf football pieces dyed and painted. So years and years later, Julie, I have yet to let go of that. The competition is maddening.
Yeah.
HowToRaiseAnAdult.com is an amazing website to find a lot of things that Julie's working on. And the book, like you said, it's not a brand new book, but it still holds up. A central idea in the book you talk about, and I'd love for you to unwind a little bit if you could, is the difference between self-esteem and self-efficacy.
Yeah. Well, this phenomenon of the self-esteem movement that was born here in California in the early 80s turned, the notion was if we're constantly there to let our kids know they're great and they're wonderful, they'll feel better about themselves. And it turns out to be sort of a really hollow promise. Childhood today is filled with the chirps of parents on the sidelines of kids' activities shouting, "Perfect, great job, buddy." And we say that, because we think it helps them feel better. But actually, the kid either doesn't know what perfect actually is or what a great job actually is, particularly if we're saying it for mundane things like, you slid down the slide, perfect. You tied your shoes, perfect. You didn't hit Billy, great job. They emerge from this childhood not knowing what greatness actually is, or conversely knowing that this was all BS, and that, this is just sort of fodder. It's just pablum. It's just not real. Self-efficacy is the foundational concept we all need to thrive as humans, according to psychologists. It's developed by this guy, Albert Bandura, identified, not developed, but it's a psychological concept developed by Albert Bandura, the Stanford professor of psych. And it's the notion that we all must have that we exist. That we exist is the core sense of self that allows us to kind of make it in the world. And you develop self-efficacy by seeing that your own actions have outcomes. I act, there's a result. Whether the result is good or bad isn't important for self-efficacy. We need to see the causality. I acted, there was an outcome. That's how I know I exist. It's like Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. Self-efficacy is I do, therefore I am. I know I exist because my actions have outcomes. So when we parents are there chirping, great job, perfect, and we're tying their shoes too long and cutting their meat too long and, doing their science projects too long and arguing with teachers and coaches for them, we are actually depriving them of the chance to build self-efficacy, and all the quote unquote self-esteem, all the certificates and trophies and ribbons in their bedroom, does not construct a sense of self.
Perfectly said. We could spend a lot of time talking about the causes, where we are, how we got here. I want to focus the last portion of our conversation on part 3 of your book, which you simply call Another Way. There's 7 or 8 different chapters there. One that caught my eye tremendously is teach them how to think. That's the refrain of a lot of frustrated teachers. These kids today don't know how to think. Whether you agree with that or not, you call upon an idea that we need to teach our kids how to think. I wonder if you could hit a few bullet points on how a parent or how a teacher or even a coach, a lot of coaches listening, can begin to teach their student athletes or children how to think.
Yeah. I was a lawyer before I was a university dean, and in law school, we were taught according to the Socratic method, which is a series of questions articulated by the instructor to the class of students. And we students had to respond to the question, and then there'd be a further question, and so on and so on. And the Socratic method is basically a method of thinking critically. It's not memorization and regurgitation. It's you're given a problem or a question, and you're asked to respond and to continue to refine that response in response to additional questions. So I tried to outline a way for parents to begin interacting with their kids that way. Too often we're speaking for our kids. So we take our kid up to the coach and we say, Johnny is having trouble, with the swing. What do you think we need to do? And the coach addresses Johnny and says, well, Johnny, let's talk about, what practice has been like this week. What have you been doing at home? And then the parent steps in and answers the question. And Johnny, never gets a chance to articulate his own thoughts because mom or dad is being super helpful. So we don't want to be speaking for our children. We want to encourage them to speak up for themselves when talking with authority figures. And we also want to teach them to interrogate their own experience. So I have some sample dialogues in the book where even with young children, we can end up doing the thinking for them. The little child says, you see your child looking at a butterfly and the child goes, ooh, a butterfly. And you say, yeah, perfect. Great job, buddy. Boom. That's no learning.
Fail.
Right? But if you can say, when your little one says, oh, a butterfly, you can say, what do you notice about the butterfly? And then the kid will say, it's flying, it's landed on the leaf. And you can say, why do you think it's landing on the leaf?
I wonder
I wonder what's happening, right? You're trying to get the child to investigate what's happening with that butterfly. Don't tell them the butterfly landed on the leaf to suck nectar out of the flower that's there, because that's what if you just tell, the kid doesn't learn. You want to invite them to discover what's happening in their environment, to think things through, to come to their own conclusions. And then you can say, yeah, that's what's happening. And that, that process is called X, Y, and Z, or whatever it happens to be. So, we want our kids to grow their brains and to become critical thinkers and to be able to analyze situations. We don't want them to just be passive recipients of knowledge that we're spewing, out of our own mouths.
I wonder if you could tell a story of ideal feedback that you get from a parent or an adult after having read your book. What would be ideal feedback that you get?
The feedback that I would get as the author?
Yeah, as you wrote the book, you put it out there, and then someone sees you at a book signing, and they come up to you and say, Julie?
Yep. Well, I hear things like, Julie, you spoke to me. I really saw myself in a lot of your examples. I realized that, I'm way too focused on doing for my kids and instead of letting them learn to do for themselves. I think that the greatest takeaway of my book is your child is not you. We are separate human beings from them. In order for them to really get out there and live a life one day, we have to embrace and acknowledge and accept and delight in the fact that they are a separate human being from us, which means our own egos are not wrapped up in who they are and how they are. We are delighting in them, becoming their own self rather than seeing them as a little extension of us. And when parents come to me, they come to me with tears in their eyes saying, you nailed it. You spoke to me, but I didn't feel criticized or critiqued. I felt supported and seen, at which point I probably have tears in my eyes. I'm saying, like, right there with you, I'm in it too. And, when I tell the stories about my own kids and the various experiences and struggles they've had, I think that's when parents really feel it. When we can connect parents to the emotion of what it's like to be a kid these days, in a school district that's, rigorous and with high achieving parents who have high expectations about the most selective colleges, when we put our kids through this childhood, and micromanage them through it, it can be a horrendous experience for kids. And I'm constantly telling stories on myself about my own growth and development to try to be a better parent to Avery and Sawyer. When parents come to me and say, thank you for telling that story about how you let Sawyer drop Spanish sophomore year of high school, you let him drop it because 5 hours of homework was sucking the life out of him. Thank you for telling that story because I'm doing that to my kid and I don't want to do that anymore.
Love it. You hit the two big words there, growth and development. I wonder if you were going to write the book over again today, what would you add or subtract?
Oh, boy. Often I get to talk to high school kids. When I go to a school, I'll talk to the parents at night, but to an assembly of kids in the day. And for a year, I kept a list of the comments that kids gave me that they wanted me to share with their parents. I'd say to the kids, I'm going to talk to your parents tonight. What do you want me to tell them so they can be even more supportive of you during these years than they currently are? And they would just emote. They would just stand up and in front of their peers, they would say things like, stop comparing me to your friends' kids, or stop comparing me to my siblings, or stop telling me that, I'll get into Harvard, if I just try hard enough. And those, in other words, the wisdom from kids, from the mouths of kids themselves, I would have a whole chapter of just bullet points on advice that kids have. And it's really not advice. It's kids pleading to parents to stop saying and doing certain things that are really making it hard to be a child today.
It's powerful stuff. As teachers are listening to this, heading into their classrooms for week 2 or 3, I definitely know things of this nature will resonate. We can't possibly cover everything in the book. And is there anything that's a major hole that we haven't discussed from the content of the book, Julie?
Yeah, the one thing I would say, Joe, particularly because you've got so many teachers and educators listening, I think the technology genius who probably lives down the road from me here in Silicon Valley, who created the parent portal for grades, has no idea what's appropriate for a developing human. I think the parent grade portal is ruining the relationship between teachers and kids and between parents and kids. It makes kids feel like they're a stock in the stock market. Are they up? Are they down? As if we're somehow going to sell them short, if they're not doing well. We parents are so obsessed with knowing every minute detail of a kid's academic life. We've forgotten that growth and learning and development take place over the course of a semester or a year. It's like if my kid was getting an A- last week, but a B+ this week, what do I do? I'm so worried, we just have to take a chill pill. We have to, let teachers teach. We have to let children learn. We have to value learning and teaching, but not act as third party. We're supplanting ourselves. We're so concerned. It means our kids don't have to be as concerned. It's like, well, I'm on top of the homework, so my kid doesn't have to be. It's completely backwards from the way it should be. So I think doing away with the parent portal or really managing it so parents are looking once every couple of weeks, not multiple times a day. And the second thing I'd say is any school that is letting parents bring forgotten homework, forgotten lunches, forgotten sporting equipment, and forgotten coats are enabling overparenting. The way the kid learns to remember their homework, their lunch, their sporting equipment, or their coat is to have forgotten it and experience the small sting or the small set of consequences that come. Our kid needs to learn to do for themselves. And when they've forgotten, we need to nod our heads and say, dang it, they're not going to be happy, but they forgot. But that's the way they're going to learn to remember tomorrow. It's parenting for that longer term, not for the short term win. And I think schools could breathe a big sigh of relief to articulate policies of don't bring forgotten stuff. We will not allow it. We're teaching responsibility and accountability here.
If you listen closely, you can hear the applause echoing off the walls far and wide. And if I could have one wish for this podcast, for my audience, for Julie's audience, it is that those minutes reach every teacher in America. It can happen. It has happened before. Much more severely negative messages have reached the ears of parents far and wide. So at the time of publication of this podcast, we will be trying to get those 2 minutes out there, Julie. That's so important.
That's great. Thank you, Joe.
Where can we point listeners, new and old, to your work and maybe a little bit of what you're working on now?
Thanks. So I have, you praised my website, which I appreciated, howtoraiseanadult.com. I'm about to flip that to JulieLythcott-Haims.com because I've written a second book. So my work life is now about parenting, but also about the second book, which is a memoir on race. I'm an African-American woman. I've written a memoir about what it's been like to be me, 49 years old. And, I think my story is just one of millions of stories that many of us can tell about what it's been like to be, quote unquote, the other in America. So that comes out in October. And I'm on Twitter at Dean Julie. I'm on Facebook, Julie Lythcott-Haims. Really try to be active on social media. So you can find me on the web or social media, and hope you'll check out my books. They're available in bookstores and online.
Yeah, you call How to Raise an Adult a book. For me, I haven't blurbed too many books, but for me, it's a sociology course.
Nice. Nice.
I mean, this is a book that, and I don't want to intimidate people. This is a book you go to looking for some pointers, some really generous and empathetic pointers on parenting, and you find out about human beings and how we got to where we are and where we'd like to be. So anytime someone of your ideas and generosity joins us here at 1% Better, it means an awful lot. I have to thank you.
Well, Joe, I love your podcast. I'm honored to have spent time with you. And, we all are trying to do our best. We're all trying to help our children just grow up and thrive. And we've just gotten slightly askew as parents lately, going for those short-term wins, trying to keep up with the Joneses. Let's remember that our job as parents is to put ourselves out of a job. And that means raising a kid who can fend without us, not when they're 8, but, 18 maybe, or certainly 28. We're supposed to equip them with skills and, try to build a good character so they can go out in the world and thrive when we're gone. I mean, that's what it means to succeed as a parent. And I think we're all capable of doing that.
Amen. Julie Lythcott-Haims, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Joe. Take care.